Previously on Crowforest Reviews.
Okay, Crime Show Fairy, this time you've gone too far.
What did I do?
Welcome to my collection.
Then there's only one place they could be. Lego World. And now the continuation. Hello and welcome to Crowforest Reviews. So I thought I'd talk about a horror movie that heavily features miniatures and models as part of its aesthetic. Because I'm currently trapped inside a miniature, so it just seems appropriate somehow. So without further ado, this is Hereditary. The movie opens, at least after the pointless block of text, with this really creepy pan-around shot of the mother's work studio, showing several of the miniatures she's working on, and then finally zooming in on the miniature of her house, focusing in on her son's bedroom, which then transitions into the real bedroom. This shot is extremely well done, and you really can't see the scene where the transition happens. The whole thing is very miniature killer. We get this not-so-subtle bit of foreshadowing when we see that the daughter, Charlie, is afraid to sleep in her room and prefers to sleep in the treehouse, causing her father to worry that she's going to die of pneumonia.
It was freezing last night. That's how you get pneumonia.
So I guess her dying of pneumonia is going to feature in the climax. Good to know. The family all go to the funeral of their recently deceased grandmother, and it's here that we get our second piece of foreshadowing, Charlie's obsessive clicking.
Stubborn, which maybe explains me. You could always count on her to always have the answer.
And if she ever was mistaken, well, that was your opinion, and you were...
Quickly followed by the third piece of obvious foreshadowing, the fact that Charlie is apparently allergic to nuts.
There aren't nuts in that either.
No.
So she's going to die from eating nuts, or possibly from pneumonia, and the clicking will identify her ghost. Got it. So cut to the mother working on another miniature, this one featuring her mother dying in a hospital. Well, that's a bit morbid. Later that night, the mother goes into her bedroom to sort through a box of her mother's thongs. What? Oh, Mom's Things. That is not a good font to use. Then she sees her dead mother watching her from the shadows, but she disappears when she flips on the light. I might be jumping the gun a little here, but I'm starting to suspect that she might be crazy. Then, as she storms out of the room, she takes the time to turn one of her miniatures around to face the other way. Well, that was dramatic. And unsettling. I guess this movie was supposed to scare us, and good job! I'm officially scared now.
I just scared myself in the workshop.
You scared the rest of us, too! So later in class... Ah! Stop scaring me like that! After class, Charlie goes down to where the bird fell, cuts off its head, and puts it in her pocket. I'm starting to think she might be crazy, too. And apparently she's being stalked by another crazy person. Maybe the whole town is crazy. That night, the cemetery calls the father to tell him that the grandmother's grave has been dug up, giving yet another point to the whole town is crazy theory. She tells her husband that she's going to the movies, but really she's going to a grief support group. Why did she feel the need to lie about that? So anyway, she starts telling the group about how her mother was crazy and how she was forced to cut off all contact with her in order to protect her son Peter from her. Which I guess explains why her mother was living with them. Have I mentioned that everyone is crazy? And speaking of crazy, Charlie takes her severed bird head and walks out into the woods, where she finds a woman, who may or may not be her dead grandmother, sitting in a ring of fire. Then her mother runs out to get her and re-emphasizes the whole dying of pneumonia thing.
Can't roam around with no shoes and no coat.
Meanwhile, Peter is going to a party with his friends, and his mother insists that he take Charlie along, even though Charlie doesn't even want to go. We get another creepy miniature shot, wherein the mother places a figure of the grandmother in the doorway of her bedroom, where her grandmother silently watches her as she sleeps, thus really cementing how sane she is. Meanwhile, at the party, Charlie accidentally eats some nuts, because it was either going to be nuts or pneumonia, and nuts won out, and her brother rushes her to the hospital, but on the way there she gets decapitated. Wait, what? That wasn't on the list? How the hell did that even happen? And what was the point of foreshadowing the nuts and pneumonia if it was decapitation that got her? And for that matter, what was the point of foreshadowing how crazy she was if you were just gonna kill her off before exploring that? And what was the point of the decapitated bird she's been carrying around? Wasn't that building to something? Wait, maybe the decapitated bird was foreshadowing of her own decapitation. Lame. So anyway, she's dead now. That sucks. Peter drives the rest of the way home, and then is more or less catatonic for the remainder of the night. And the next morning, the mother finds the body and completely loses it. Which is understandable, but she wasn't exactly stable before. This is not a family that needed any more reasons to lose their already very loose grip on sanity. So cut to the funeral, which features this phenomenal shot. I still question this plot point, but that shot does a fantastic job of illustrating the mother's despair. Peter is laying on his bed looking out the window when the light in the treehouse comes on. I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to make of this shot, because it could either mean that Peter is crazy too and is just seeing things, or it could mean that his mother is out there because she's crazy. But it turns out that I should have just waited 2 seconds. The winner is, his mother is out there because she's crazy. But don't get too complacent in the idea that Peter's not crazy, because he's now seeing rearview mirrors in class. And he has a minor psychotic episode while smoking marijuana, which is honestly a little strange, because given his family history, you'd think he'd be tripping significantly fewer balls while smoking marijuana. Meanwhile, the mother drives to her support group, doesn't go in, gets the phone number of a stranger in the parking lot, returns home, and lies about where she's been. That's what sane people do. Wait, I spoke too soon. She can't sleep, so she goes out to her dead daughter's treehouse to sleep. That's what sane people do. The next morning, while working on her miniatures, she accidentally spills some paint on the paper that she got from the stranger in the parking lot the night before. And she takes it as a sign that she needs to go see the woman. Again, that's what sane people do. So what does she tell this stranger? She casually tells her about that one time she almost killed her kids in a fire. What?
And Peter always held it against me.
Yeah, no shit! So anyway, later at home, she's working on another miniature. This one featuring...
Jesus Christ, Annie.
Yeah, that's about all you can say to that. Well, that and perhaps, what the fuck? So after the most awkward dinner ever, we get another shot of the mother working on, or at least looking at, one of her miniatures. This time, one of the ones that she's actually supposed to be working on for her job at the museum. But she's been so caught up in making death scenes of her family that she hasn't really been working on it. Which I can kind of relate to. At the time that I'm writing this, I'm working ahead to my next year's Halloween special instead of working on this year's Halloween special. And at the time that I'm filming this, I'm working on my later this year Halloween special instead of working on more current projects. So that's a double. The next morning, she goes to the store to get some more supplies, and she runs into Joanne, the stranger from the parking lot. Joanne, for her part, gives her an unsolicited seance.
If you're here...
Oh, good, because she wasn't crazy enough already. During the seance, the glass moves on its own, and the chalk writes on the board without assistance. But since the mother is the point of view character here, we still can't necessarily take this at face value, since she's not exactly a reliable narrator. While driving back, the mother hears her daughter's distinctive click from the back seat and almost has a heart attack. Then, later in bed, she sees a whole bunch of what I can only assume are ghost ants, since surely someone else would have noticed if they were really there.
Those are probably phantasmal bugs.
She follows the ghost ants into her son's room. Yeah, they're ghost ants.
Sure, phantasmal bugs.
Peter wakes up, and his mother tells him that she never wanted him, and that she tried to induce a miscarriage, and then the room catches fire, and then she wakes up in her bed. So, did she tell him that or not? And does she think that or not? Wow, that was a very horrifying scene to have absolutely no context for. The next morning, the mother gathers everyone downstairs and tells them that she wants to have a seance. This naturally makes her husband think that she's gone crazy, which is just ridiculous. She is way beyond crazy at this point.
What language is even that?
What sentence structure was even that? The mother calls out for Charlie, and if Charlie the unicorn doesn't show up, I'm going to be very disappointed. It's not like that would be any crazier than any of the other stuff she's seeing. Peter feels the air moving, but his father doesn't feel anything, once again suggesting that Peter is also crazy. The glass moves, apparently on its own, but we can't really tell if the mother subtly pushed it when they weren't looking. Then the candle explodes and Charlie possesses her mother. The father douses water on her to bring her out of it, and Peter loses it, having been overcome by the contact with his dead sister. I really feel like I need to cut to a clip of someone saying, "Everyone in this house is crazy."
All the ponies in this town are crazy!
Close enough, I'll take it. We get a brief miniature montage, which is always awesome, regardless of context. And the montage ends with this transition to Peter's real classroom, where he's being tormented by his dead sister's clicking and by his own evil reflection. Have I mentioned that he's crazy? Meanwhile, when the father calls the mother to tell her that their kid is in trouble at school, she naturally assumes that it's their dead daughter who's in trouble at school. As you do. Then she gets so mad at a phone call that she gets that she snaps a chair in half like it's made of toothpicks. Granted, it was a miniature chair, and it probably was made of toothpicks, but still. I think she was being fired from her job at the museum or something, but I couldn't really hear over the sound of how terrified I was. And then she proceeds to destroy the entire miniature. And then, just for good measure, she moves on to another miniature and decapitates her son's figure. That's a sane thing to do. She walks down the hall into her daughter's bedroom and sees a sketchbook drawing itself. Well, after all the other things she's seen, this almost seems normal. Meanwhile, Peter is woken up by Charlie, who's standing in the corner of his room. Then her head falls off and turns into a ball. See, this is why I said that a sketchbook drawing itself was relatively normal. There is some freaky shit in this house. Then arms grip Peter's head and start trying to twist it off. And the next thing we know, his mother is standing over him and denying everything.
You were pulling on my head!
What? No, I wasn't. I just came in. You were screaming. All the ponies in this town are crazy!
Then the mother tries to burn the sketchbook that was drawing itself. But when the book catches fire, her sleeve also catches fire, and she can't put out her sleeve until she pulls the book out of the fire and puts it out. In any other movie, this would be a classic example of sympathetic magic. But here, it's far more likely to be a case of schizophrenic magic, and the flaming shirt was all in her head. The next morning, she goes back to see Joan, her new friend slash fellow crazy person. And at this point, even the camera knows she's crazy, opting to film her upside down. Good call. But when she gets there, Joan isn't there. But we do still get a creepy pan of her apartment. Okay, now we know Joan is crazy. I mean, her summoning circle is a triangle. Who does that? And then, as if we needed any more proof, Joan shows up at Peter's school and starts shouting about how she's going to expel him.
I expel you!
Which is just crazy. She's not even on the board of directors of his school. She can't expel him. And how come no one else is noticing all the crazed shouting? Or is this just such a normal occurrence in this town that no one cares? The mother discovers that her friend Joan is really her great-aunt Joni, because a welcome mat told her so. She returns home to look through great-aunt Joan's things, and she finds a bunch of weird-ass Bible-ish prophecies. So, I guess she found a copy of Left Behind. Yeah, definitely a copy of Left Behind. Then she goes up into the attic through a swarm of Amityville flies. Or possibly the leftover CGI bees from Wicker Man. It's a little unclear. And then she finds the corpse of her long-deceased mother in the corner of the attic. As you do. Also, she's been decapitated posthumously. As you do. Back with Peter in class, he is being actively tormented by his dead sister's incessant clicking. Which it turns out is coming from him. Then he smashes his head into his desk twice before coming out of his trance. And, of course, no one even tried to stop him. The father takes Peter home and then goes to investigate the attic. And it turns out that there really is a body up there, and it wasn't just a delusion. But, of course, the father thinks that she's the one who dug up the body all those nights that she was pretending to be at the movies. And, yeah, I kind of have to agree with that assessment. Obviously, the mother doesn't think that she dug up the body, but then she wouldn't. She's crazy. The mother tries to get the father to throw the sketchbook into the fire, since she can't do it herself without burning up. But apparently she has no problem with him burning up. And no, it's not a matter of her thinking that he'll somehow be immune to it. The way she's talking and saying how much she loves him, she clearly doesn't expect him to survive. The father refuses to play into her delusions, and so she grabs the book and tosses it in, and her husband catches fire anyway. Which is totally not in sync with what we saw earlier, but then, if you're crazy, your internal story doesn't really need to make sense. Clearly she set him on fire, and her crazy brain constructed the story that we saw on screen. Then she crawls on the wall. What? No amount of crazy can make you fly. And we can't even pretend that that was the son's crazy episode because he doesn't even see it. That was just kind of an odd shot. Peter gets up and starts looking around the house for his parents, not knowing that his dad is dead. At least until he finds the body. And his mother is once again crawling on the ceiling behind him. And there's a naked man in the closet. Okay? Then his mother chases him into the attic, which he closes her out of. And then she floats up to the ceiling to bang her head into the attic door. What the hell is going on? Have we just given up all pretense of a narrative? Peter looks around the attic at all the somehow still lit candles, and he sees his picture in the middle of a chalk circle surrounded by candles. Then he looks up to see his mother floating there and decapitating herself with a wire. And there's more naked people! He jumps out the window, since death is apparently better than finishing this movie, which has by now gone way beyond jumping the shark. Then he hears his dead sister's click and goes to the treehouse, past more naked people. What the hell? I have never had to do this much censoring in an episode before. He climbs into the treehouse amidst even more naked people, but this time some of them are at least wearing robes, so I guess at least some of the cult members had no nudity clauses in their contracts. Also, his mother's headless corpse is already there, having somehow beat him there. How? Well, I don't know why I'm even asking a logistics question of a movie that has so thoroughly rejected logic at this point. Anyway, to make a long and very confusing story short, Peter's dead grandmother welcomes him to the group, addressing him by his dead sister's name, and saying that Peter is dead, having died in the fall from the attic, apparently. And now Charlie is possessing his body. And that Charlie is really the demon Payman, who has waited all these years for a male host. Or some shit like that. Honestly, this whole movie just completely falls apart in the last 20 minutes. And it had so much potential! There was so much promise at the beginning of the movie, with the terrifying family dynamic, mental issues, and chilling performances, not to mention the superb aesthetic of the film, from the miniature model work to just the way that the film is shot. The movie does take a few turns early on that I wouldn't have taken, but even so, it still does work well enough. At least until that bullshit ending. And yes, I know that the whole cult thing was actually foreshadowed throughout the whole film. And I could technically have seen it coming if I hadn't been so focused on her being crazy. But here's the thing, though. The movie's called Hereditary. Her being crazy and having a crazy gene that's passed down the family line is the main focus of the movie. Making it a demon-worshipping cult completely destroys the premise of the movie. So now all of those earlier scenes of her being crazy will look back on and say, oh, she wasn't crazy at all, it was just demons. The demon cult plot could have worked fine in another movie, but here it just clutters and confuses the plot that was already there, until that final scene where it just completely hijacks the plot. This movie doesn't really know what it wants to be, so it tries to be too many things. Is it about a woman with inherited mental problems who goes crazy? Or is it about a demon cult? Both? Neither? Of course, as with everything else, we could assume that this final scene is just yet another fantasy of the mother, who has by this time gone completely catatonic, and is reliving this terrible fantasy over and over again. But this clearly isn't what we're meant to take from the movie. But still, I think that's what I'll choose to take from it. That gives you the closest thing that you're going to get to a cohesive narrative. Now, of course, you may disagree with me and think that the demon cult ending makes sense and is a good twist. And fair enough, but personally I think it falls a bit flat. But still, it's not a bad movie, it just could have been better is all. And I do really love the aesthetic of the miniatures. Speaking of which, I still need to find a way out of here.
What did I miss?
A demon cult.
Damn it, I love those.
Yeah, but this one didn't even make sense. It's like the whole movie, it looks like this lady is just cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, and then twist ending, it was a demon cult the whole time.
Hey, maybe that's how we got into this situation too.
Yeah, wouldn't that be ridiculous? Well, I guess we'd better look around, start knocking on doors, see if anyone's seen anything. Well, okay. Well, I haven't seen anything. How about you? No, nothing.
Come with me.
It was many moons ago. Our community was overrun by a cult. This cult, which started out as a very small group, soon gained a large following, and before long they had accrued enough power that they were able to fulfill their ultimate purpose, to resurrect the adversary and to imprison the creator. Ever since the takeover, everyone not involved in the cult has been afraid to leave their homes and have been deeply suspicious of strangers. If the cult knew that I'd been talking to you, I wish you luck. If you fail, I don't know what will become of us.